No hopes for any more survivors from the Baltic ferry disaster. A big defeat for the PM on uranium, and the economy also takes a shudder. And a fatal crash during practice for the Bathurst 1000.
From National 9 News, this is Nightline with Jim Whaley.
Good evening. Searchers say there's no chance of finding any more survivors from the ferry disaster off Finland. 760 people are missing, presumed dead, inside the Estonia, which lies at the bottom of the Baltic Sea. The focus now turns to the cause of the accident, and so far all the signs point to a faulty cargo door.
The last of the lucky few, hauled from the freezing Baltic by helicopter crews, the water's too cold to expect anyone else is still alive. One life raft was discovered with its passengers all dead, but rescue ships are still patrolling.
But we continue and try to find everybody. Thank you.
The car and passenger ferry was heading for Stockholm in Sweden when it went down. Most of the survivors were taken to hospitals in Finland, suffering exposure.
We are rather shocked.
This man clung inside a lifeboat for 6 hours after 3 others were swept out. It's been the most harrowing of days for the search teams who have scoured these waters with little success. For the thousands of relatives and friends, the wait has been heartbreaking. In Sweden, Finland and Estonia, families have been watching survivor lists which are all too short.
No news, no.
I am waiting and I don't know.
What's your situation?
My dad is alive. We just found out he's alive.
In the Estonian capital, a church service for the victims. One man holding a toy, a memento of his wife who was working on the ferry. Before the Estonia sailed from Tallinn, a safety inspector reportedly questioned the state of rubber seals on a cargo door at the bow. This crewman has described water pouring through that door before the capsize.
I cannot assume a major fault with the vessel because she was in a very good shape, and she's sailed in much worse storms than we had yesterday night.
Authorities are preparing to send a remote-controlled submarine to examine the Estonia, now laying 80 meters deep. Of the 824 suspected dead, only 58 bodies have been recovered. Most of the rest entombed in the wreck, in the worst maritime disaster in Europe since World War II. In Turku, Finland, Mark Ferguson for Nightline.
Prime Minister Keating suffered a double blow today, starting with some bad economic news. The current account deficit blowing out to $2.14 billion. It was a disappointing figure, though some of it could be blamed on an increase in capital investment, including 2 Qantas planes worth nearly $250 million. The PM's other setback was a defeat over the uranium issue, as Peter Harvey reports.
The uranium debate may be over for the moment, but the bitterness remains. The men who wanted changes to the existing 3 mines policy were scathing in their condemnation of ALP delegates who opposed them.
When you go home to your nice little suburban block, to your double garage, and the healthy children, think a bit about the people who live in poverty in the Northern Territory, the people who would have been the beneficiaries of this.
And if you simply sleaze around like a bunch of prostitutes in the hope that you'll pick up green votes, then you'll lose.
The move to expand uranium mining failed because the party's right-wing faction couldn't get the numbers. Mr. Keating says for the change to come, planning should have started weeks ago.
I've not taken a running jump at this issue, because to have taken the running jump, I would have had to start running about 4 or 5, 6 weeks ago.
Not surprisingly, the opposition leader seized on what he regards as Mr. Keating's failure to command his party.
He doesn't have the strength or the leadership to convince the Labor Party to abandon that policy altogether.
Conservation organisations supported the non-outcome, but the people who stood to gain most remain frustrated.
The party has made a decision not to expand uranium mining, and we're very pleased with that outcome.
Whilst it is nice to hug a tree, it is also nicer to hug a living child.
The conference ended on another disappointing note for the government. the worst balance of payments deficit in nearly 5 years.
Seasonal justice 2.13.
And the bad news for Australia is that not only is this a bad monthly figure, but the trend shows it's getting worse. This is not the kind of thing the government can ignore. It's got to do something.
Australia's sales to the world went up by only 2% during the month, but imports soared by 7%. Acting Treasurer Kim Beazley was putting the best possible spin on the figures.
Basically, the difference between this month and last month is a series of one-offs, including a ship and parts for the Defence Forces and a couple of aircraft for Qantas.
Peter Harvey reporting for Nightline from Hobart.
The bushfire threat across New South Wales and Queensland has eased tonight at the end of what's been another hectic day for firefighters. Residents of the Blue Mountains west of Sydney today face the prospect of evacuating their homes for the second time this year.
Fire crews in the Blue Mountains today proved practice makes perfect. Brigades moving quickly to bring under control a blaze threatening the town of Falconbridge. Continuous wind shifts made the going difficult. A helicopter was called in to douse fronts in the rugged gorges. For residents, it was a reminder of last January. More than 20 people were treated for eye complaints and breathing problems.
It's a bit eerie, you know, raise the hairs on the back of the neck, so to speak.
Late this afternoon, the blaze was almost in hand. Then more fires started, threatening nearby towns of Hazelbrook and Woodford. By early this evening, they too were contained. Tonight, brigades are keeping a check on spot fires.
Come on, give me a hand with this side.
Brisbane awoke to a thick fog of smoke this morning, a sign of what lay ahead for fire crews as they spent another day fighting outbreaks around the city. The biggest losses have been further north around Rockhampton, this farmer losing his mango crop.
We thought we were right after the frost. The trees were just starting to come back lovely. And now the fire on top of them, it's burned them all back again.
While the immediate fire threat has eased tonight, there are still hundreds of fires burning in isolated areas of eastern Australia. Fire officials, like so many others, are praying for rain. Rod Brewham reporting for Nightline.
A teenager has been sentenced to at least 9 years jail over the stabbing murder of another youth at a dance party in Sydney last year. Schoolboy Jeffrey Barrett was asked for money and gave it, but then was fatally stabbed through the heart. The judge said there was no explanation for the attack, and the 17-year-old murderer had shown little remorse. Jeffrey Barrett's family said the 9-year minimum term was totally inadequate. The man accused of the 7 backpacker murders was back in a Sydney court today. Ivan Milat wants to have one charge of attempted murder heard separately from 13 other charges, arguing that it's the only way to guarantee a fair trial. The judge reserved his decision. There was tragedy on the Mount Panorama track at Bathurst today during practice for the weekend's big race. Victorian driver Don Watson was killed when he hit a safety barrier after losing control of his car.
In the 56-year history of Bathurst, the race has claimed the lives of 4 drivers. Today, Don Watson became the 5th. On the fastest part of the circuit, Watson failed to take the corner. At 250 kilometres an hour, his Commodore slammed into the barrier at Caltex Chase.
He just went straight ahead along the concrete wall and didn't appear to slow down at all and just hit the tyre wall over there.
Emergency teams began a frantic rescue, and although Watson was taken to hospital, he died soon after.
A lot of the drivers are upset, and they're just not saying terribly much about it at all.
Ironically, it was the same bend that killed Mick Bergman in 1986, the Caltex Chase named in memory of his team. It was 42-year-old Watson's second Bathurst. This year, the father of 2 owned his own team. Taking up the sport late in life, the transport operator was following a lifelong dream that ended in a matter of seconds. It's a risk that racing drivers constantly face, but continue to take on.
Well, the other competitors realise just exactly what we're in for here. You know, it's my choice to go out there and do what I got to do.
Police are investigating brake failure. The Watson team were too distressed to talk about the accident, packing up and heading back to Melbourne. Organisers have no plans to mark the death, preferring not to dwell on such tragedies. Instead, they say, as Don Watson would have wanted, the race must go on. At Bathurst, Flo Bitcon for Nightline.
After the break, what every man should know about prostate cancer and the media scrum as the world switches on to the O.J. Simpson trial. Time runs out for some people waiting for organ transplants, but now an artificial liver device is saving lives. It's already proven itself in Britain and is now being trialled in Australia.
The liver is one of our most vital organs, so when it shuts down, a person can be at death's doorstep within 24 hours, giving doctors little time to perform miracles.
Until now, there hasn't been anything to support the patient, keep them going until you know whether they can recover or get an organ.
However, at London's King's College Hospital, doctors are buying time with what they call a bioartificial liver. It works outside the body, made up of columns with thousands of fibres to filter blood from the patient. And amazingly, doctors have cultured masses of human cells inside those fibres that copy the liver's functions, taking toxins out and even putting back essential enzymes and proteins. It's successfully kept 5 patients alive.
And they've recovered or they've been transplanted.
Although the artificial liver has been used so far only on a small group, doctors here are already trialling it on animals, and they confidently expect it will be helping the first Australian patients within 6 months.
There's no question that it works and that we're heading down that line.
And the team from Royal Prince Alfred Hospital says work is already underway to improve the device so that the human cells keep renewing themselves and will eventually help more than just the critically ill.
We're hoping that it'll develop into a more efficient artificial liver that can be used more or less generally for anyone with any degree of liver failure.
Cheryl Taylor for Nightline.
No one has suggested there's been too much publicity or funding for breast cancer research. But there have been criticisms it has overshadowed another dreadful disease, prostate cancer in men. As Australia's population ages, the incidence of prostate cancer is increasing. It makes up 20% of cancers detected among men. And now the levels of research, detection and prevention are being questioned.
When you ask questions, nobody can give you an answer.
And the news on prostate cancer at the recent International Urology Conference in Sydney was bad.
It's now become the most commonly diagnosed cancer in men.
It's estimated 1 in 16 men will develop the disease by the time they're 75. Most at risk, those over 50. A diet high in meat and a family history of cancer further increase the chances.
If it's detected in its early stages, the chances of survival are good. But one of the few things they know of this disease is that it spreads quickly. And if it's discovered too late, most will die within 3 years.
For those at risk, a checkup every 12 months is what's recommended.
Is that effective prevention?
Well, we think it's an effective prevention, but I think I'd have to be honest and say we just don't know.
It wasn't effective for 54-year-old Joe Podesta. Despite annual checkups, Joe's cancer was untreatable by the time it was detected.
I had a checkup a year earlier and I was clear. I went back a year later and I was full of cancer.
And with just a short time left to live, understandably, Joe's angry.
I believe that had I had a 6-monthly checkup, we could have caught this in time, a simple procedure, and I'd have had a normal life.
The reasons they don't screen every 6 months aren't medical.
If 2 million men went along every 6 months to have their prostate checked, we'd certainly need a lot of urologists. General practitioners alone would be swamped by this sort of load.
But for Joe, that's not good enough.
So what do? We just let people die. I've got a wife, I've got beautiful children, and this is the time I'm supposed to be enjoying them. I'm not going to get to see any of this.
Medical researchers are chasing funding to learn more about the disease. Joe wants to see more focus on prevention.
I believe there should be some sort of clinic, like they have for women, for breast cancer.
Although a regular check didn't save Joe from prostate cancer, he does urge others to be checked, and more often.
It's only a 5-minute procedure to get checked, and that can save your life.
Jodie Weatherup for Nightline.
There's more concern for the safety of Australian hostage David Wilson, who's being held in Cambodia in a Khmer Rouge jungle camp. The Cambodian army has launched a major offensive against the guerrilla unit, and there are fears that Wilson and his fellow hostages will be victims of the fighting or retribution. 29-year-old Wilson and 2 other Westerners were last seen alive 8 days ago. In Haiti, cheering crowds have welcomed their elected politicians out of hiding. Protected by American troops, the parliament held its first meeting since January to discuss an amnesty for the military rulers. Nearby, supporters of President Aristide were attacked when a paramilitary group opened fire, wounding one man before US troops restored order. Those soldiers may not be there for long. The US Congress wants them out within 6 months.